But astronauts that are on station or wherever they are, their day is millions of dollars a second. And so mission control tells them what to do every second of every day.
Welcome to the Industry of UX, a podcast crafted to review, share, and discuss the ins and outs of the user experience industry. Let's dive into the episode. Hello, you wonderful UXers. Welcome back to another episode of the Industry of UX. I'm your host, Filippo Lovotti, and I'm glad to be here with you today, right at the end of this January 2021. Okay, can you guess what we talk about today?
This is one of the tools with which man is creating a new age. But the age of space is also the latest chapter in a story as old as man himself.
Today, we talk about UX in space and a few other things, including Neopets, with Macy Nguyen. Macy is a senior UX designer and researcher, and she's working as a federal contractor at NASA Ames. I love bringing different stories and unique perspectives on the show, and Macy has plenty of both. Okay, listen to this. In her current role, she has done some very interesting UX work, including an astronaut planning and scheduling application and spacewalking research. Today, Macy and I talk about all these cool things I just told you about, plus her story into UX, her method and approach to working with developers, and her favorite element of UX. Let me know what you think about the episode by tweeting @IndustryUX or leaving a comment on our subreddit, The Industry of UX. No offense to Android users, but if you liked the episode, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps us climb the charts, bring the podcast to a wider audience, and ultimately produce a better show. Now, on to the conversation with Macy.
Have you heard of Neopets? Do you have Neopets in Italy?
Are you kidding me? Of course.
You're so insulting. Okay, I'm so sorry. Everybody has Neopets. For those uninitiated, Neopets is like these creatures that you can collect and I guess take care of. I don't even remember at this point, but you play games and you collect all these items that are specialty and all these things. And so in the Neopets world, when you collect these items, you can also sell them to other Neopets people. And so the shop you have in the Neopets world, you can customize. And back then, the web was young and you don't have all these, templates or anything. And so they just opened up HTML directly into the shop page and you can customize from there. And so that was my first foray into creating things on the web. And I thought I was honestly like hot stuff. Like I'm view sourcing other Neopet shops pages that I liked and like stealing their code and like altering it a little bit. And like, honestly, like that's how I got into coding and learning HTML and designing too, and just being able to kind of express myself digitally. And so I thought originally I was going to be this like coder queen. And I was like, this is it. So I should do my rest of my life. And so I was originally wanting to go into computer science. And after, one computer science class in high school, I obviously was not cut out for it. And so I went into design traditionally, went to design school, had an art background, Bauhaus, all of that. And also found out that I didn't gravitate towards that either. And after, getting out of design school, I landed a job designing mobile apps and kind of putting a visual polish on mobile apps. And that's when I really started to get into UX. And without, having a UX designer on the team, I was officially just a UI designer. And I was responsible for everything, like how the app was put together, how it looked, working with developers to ship it. So I kind of started out doing my own UX. And at that time, mobile was, fairly new. And I, had to learn all of these principles and all of these things kind of on my own with the help of, really talented designers around me. And once I kind of started moving into kind of a general agency world where not just doing mobile, I'm doing web. And then I'm also not the only UI designer anymore. Like I have a team around me and I have UX designers that I'm kind of paired with now. I started to get frustrated with some of the interactions that were being kind of shipped to me and some of the wireframes and prototypes. And I was like, wait, you don't do that on mobile. Like, that's not how that works, because a lot of the designers I was working with had a web background and they didn't really get mobile. And so to me, I was like, well, I never used to have to break this part of my workflow before and just focus on the visuals. I used to be able to do everything. And so I really got into UX by just listening to myself, kind of all the way back from Neopets and saying, this is the thing that I do like, and this is the thing that I don't like. And I'm good at that. I'm not good at that. So getting into UX like seems pretty linear, but I had to kind of bounce back and forth between lots of different situations and kind of problems that were presented to me and how I reacted to them. So UX to me really started when I was getting interested in the system itself and wanting to be a part of shaping the system and helping users get through their goals and their day and whatever they have to do. I wanted to more and more be like, starting from the visual design side of it, be closer to the beginning. I was like, oh, just put me in front of that part of it. Put me in front of that part. And then eventually I was like, well, in UX, that's the perfect part where I need to be in, where I can receive a problem, kind of analyze it, and kind of see what to do from there.
From Neopets to UX. Well, that's pretty cool. Knowing what you know now about UX, where do you see yourself moving towards?
It's interesting. I just started talking about like getting more in front of the process that I'm currently in. And that's what I find myself in as well, where at my current job, I'm in a very generalist role and we don't have product managers to work with. And so we kind of act as our own product managers. And I'm very interested in that side of the house now, where I'm also like kind of stealing from product managers that I've worked with and loved and trying to, do justice to their methods and things like that. So road mapping is a really, really great exercise that I love to do collaboratively with clients and internally, with our own teams. And I get really excited when this is so nerdy. I get really excited going to grooming meetings because I'm like talking to developers and like really trying to hash out a certain feature or even like a piece of a feature. And we're just getting so in the weeds with these edge cases and thinking about, especially, working with the problems that I have at NASA, how is this going to work in 20 years? And how is this going to scale with a different team maybe that might need to take this on, which is a totally different conversation than when I was working with startups and, we don't care about tomorrow. We just need to ship this today. Like it's such a different conversation. And I think it's so much more engaging to me now than kind of dropping into Figma and like tweaking like the radius of a button. It's such a different world to me. And I'm so interested in that.
You mentioned something really interesting, the way you work with developers. I think UX designers and UX practitioners in general have different types of relationship with developers. If you work in a centralized UX team versus a cross-functional team, or being a resource to the developers versus being a partner. This type of relationship is really more of an art form than a science. How do you work with developers today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I was so lucky in my career where we worked with developers very closely and just by design. I was the only UI designer. We had one UX designer, and the rest of the company was like 15-person company, right? We have 2 designers and 13 developers. And so they're all saying I need this, I need that. And then we're kind of talking really closely. And that was one of my first experiences in the design world. And so I was so used to working with them just because I sat right behind them and we would go get beers and we were just such a close knit community. So I think that's where it starts is the relationship that you have and you build with designer or with developers rather. And you have to kind of see them as people. Like they're not like your teammate or they're your opposite or whatever. They're your partner and they have this completely different lens, but they're looking at the same problem that you're looking at in their expertise. And you're looking at that problem with your expertise. And so I love kind of thinking about it in that way and not necessarily thinking of it as, no, you versus me. It's how do we get to the solution, which we both want to get to together and respect each other's expertise and skills. And honestly, I've worked with more developers probably in my career than designers. And so for me, it's kind of, I'm learning to work with designers more, but in terms of like your original question, working with developers, it's about, first building that relationship. So for example, developer I worked with a long time ago, we were building this app called Flow, and I found out that just naturally through our conversations, he and I both watched The Walking Dead like pretty religiously, and so in my mock-ups, I would put in like little like nods to The Walking Dead, like characters as like usernames and like theme songs and like situations with The Walking Dead. Because like that's something that we shared. And we always talked about like the new episode and it was amazing. And I think that, those little things, they're silly, but they help to build that relationship. And so developers also like need to see you as a person and not as the designer that's going to tell me what to do. Like they need to just see you as a teammate because they already see their developer partners as a teammate, but it's up to you to kind of break that barrier a lot of the time. So that's what I try to do. So it really just starts, a little bit farther back from the design where we build up the relationship. And then once I do that, kind of break down this like honestly I like to be just like silly. Like I'll talk about code like it's everyone codes in like binary. So I'll just be like, oh yeah, definitely like 0 1 0 0 1. And I don't know, I've been doing that joke for years. It just kills it. And so just like being silly and trying to break down like the seriousness of our work helps and then start talking in their language. So, I have just a basic knowledge of HTML and CSS. So learning that and like kind of trying to refresh on that too. So keeping up, with Code Academy and learning JavaScript was part of it. I mean, learning is a very generous term for that, but knowing as much as I can about how things are built so I can communicate to developers in a shared language. So I'm not necessarily talking about, I need this thing to be blue or whatever. I'm saying I need this interaction to click and then I need this state and then I need, XYZ. Yeah, so those are types of things that I do. Another thing that I like to do is system diagrams. So, kind of mapping out a user flow with the technology in mind. So, thinking about what APIs are we using to authenticate users, and what happens when the user drops internet somehow. Your phone dies during this interaction or you go through a tunnel or whatever. And honestly, those are things that I work into the system diagrams and user flows because of conversations that I've had with developers. So I think that's kind of the final piece of it is kind of constantly talking with developers, partnering with them like early and often. So not necessarily waiting until you have a final polished mock-up that's client approved or whatever to bring to them, coming to them first before you go to the client, coming to them with sketches or system diagrams or anything that's malleable that they can react to. And then they'll ask tons of questions that you never thought of. Like there's this developer that we used to joke about that had like the best edge cases. And we would be like, what if the moon was in its third phase on the fourth Sunday of March? Like, how would the user need to react to that? We'd be like, I don't know, man. Like, let's go back to the drawing board. So I think I always tell it as like I've been beaten down by developers in my career where I can ask myself these questions now and I can ask other designers these questions as we're critiquing their designs. And it's really just a skill that you build up over time working directly with developers.
That is a great point. In this moment in your career, if I asked you to choose your favorite element of UX, which one would you pick and why?
Yeah, I think that right now, point in time, I am so curious about the strategy portion of it. And I think that there's a lot of different reasons for that. But my main reason is that strategy is so nebulous, it could be anything. And there's so many different tools in your tool belt to handle a strategy problem versus something like a surface problem. That's what I went to school for. Like, that's what you can do with typography and color. And it's a very straight line from what you can do to solve a surface problem to, what the problem is versus a strategy problem. There's not really a straight line there. Like, it's such a ambiguous thing. So yeah, I think I'm very interested in the strategy side of the house nowadays. And it's taken me a long time to kind of realize that and be interested in something that's so ambiguous because I used to hate ambiguous problems. And I hated when, projects weren't planned out and thought through clearly or, blame the sales guy for selling the project wrong or whatever. And now I'm thinking like, oh, I would love to have a wrong solved problem. And then I can be the person that goes in there and is saying, oh, like, what is the problem though? Like, is that really the issue? And kind of use different tools in my toolbox to kind of chip away at that and figure out what that problem is and how to solve it. I think that's so interesting now.
Yep, totally agree with you there. Strategy is definitely my favorite too. I know earlier you mentioned the moon in the third phase, and we just talked about nebulous strategy. This is clearly pushing us to talk about your current role as a contractor for NASA. I know that there might be things you cannot share and cover, but I'd like to talk more about the things you can share.
Yeah, I guess just to clarify real quick, I'm technically a federal contractor. So I don't work for NASA proper. I work for the San Jose State University Research Foundation. And my project is on site at NASA Ames Research Center. So that's what that is. I think in terms of interesting wise, I did a research project with a team that makes an application for astronauts that need to plan their own schedule for their day. And it sounds kind of bananas. Like, I get to tell myself what to do every day. You get to tell yourself what you want to do every day. But astronauts that are on station or wherever they are, their day is millions of dollars a second. And so mission control tells them what to do every second of every day, pretty much. And this is easier in low Earth orbit when, the ISS is orbiting Earth. But as we think about long duration missions to Mars and beyond, even the moon, there's going to be some communication delays. And so, like, a 5-minute delay in communications is really going to impact how an astronaut is going to make decisions about how they plan their day. And they're going to have to be doing those plannings and replannings themselves throughout the day. So I got to help out a team that is working on that specific problem, which is really cool. And they are thinking about missions in at first in a very kind of like granular sense for spacewalks or EVAs, as we would call them. So the most interesting thing that I worked on is this EVA project where I got to go to mission control. This was actually in last February, like right before lockdowns and the pandemic. So I got to go on site mission control and observe how a flight controller would go through an EVA procedure and kind of handle how to communicate to the rest of mission control about where in the procedure they are and how to react to certain situations that the simulation was throwing at them. It was a training simulation for a flight controller that handles EVAs. And it was like the coolest research that I could ever have been on in my entire life. And it's probably the coolest research I will ever have to do. I think that's as much as I can say about that project because I do work on projects like that are a little more, under lock and key. Most of the time, I work on other types of projects that are literally and figuratively grounded and yeah, less of a secret and that kind of stuff. But I could say I got to do research on that project and we're thinking about how to use iPads as a way to kind of help that process. And yeah, that's probably the coolest thing I've gotten to do at NASA so far.
This is also interesting. Honestly, I like to hear you use this specific terminology. Did you know all these terms before you started your current role?
I am such a nerd about enterprise design. Like, I love designing for people that need to do something for their job. And so I make it a point to be super prepared and Google the shit out of sorry, I don't know if I can cuss, but I Google the shit out of it, like, and, find and NASA is actually the easiest kind of domain to learn, I think. It's a little bit counterintuitive because it's rocket science and whatever, right? But, like, it's a government entity, like, everything's on Google, it's public, and so I can find information about, like, the people that I'm working with or the domain that I'm working with, like, I can find all this information about spacewalks and things like that, as much as, it's possible. And so for the spacewalk project in particular, I remember, kind of cramming like on the flight there and beforehand and kind of just digging through all of this information and learning everything there is to know about spacewalks so I can again like speak that language to the people that I'm working with. And I think when you start to speak someone's language, you break down that barrier of like you're an other person and now like, oh, you're on the same page as me. Like, you know what I'm talking about, right? And I love being able to do that. I think it's kind of a superpower. So whether it's like NASA or I don't know, like I've worked with people that do construction or thermal photography or whatever, like I'm such a nerd and I'll like look up like trade magazines and kind of figure it out. Because first of all, it's very interesting all the different kinds of jobs there are in the world and what people have to do. And just being able to like immerse yourself in that information, I think is so important for a designer. And so, yeah, that's, how I learned all of that to just kind of speak nonsense. I think when everyone first joins a NASA project, there's all these acronyms and words and sayings and directorates and all of these things that you have no idea how they all connect together. And you just start picking up the lingo over and over. Like, you can spout like report numbers and it's bananas. I mean, honestly, like there's still some meetings today that someone will talk about something and I'll take notes and I'll be like, okay, I'll Google that later. I'm going to put a point in that and I'll figure that out.
Yeah, that's a great way of doing it. We're getting close to the end of our conversation. And so I wanted to ask you, what advice would you give to a UXer that is trying to make sense of a complex and nebulous problem?
Yeah, I would say you have to come up with 100 questions about something like an artifact or, sit and listen to a meeting and come up with as many questions as possible about what people are saying and what are the dynamics between the people that are talking. Because I think the more you learn about UX, the more you learn about strategy. And it's just a natural progression, right? Like you talked about your career. And I 100% agree. I think that beginning of my career, I needed very clear constraints. And the more and more that I progressed into my career, the more I listened to people that were asking questions and realized like, oh, I never even thought to ask that. Like I just assumed it was XYZ, but now, like, who cares about the alphabet? Like that's such a great question. And asking the wrong questions too. I think that's totally fair to learn how to ask questions by asking the wrong ones. But you also have to be humble enough to be wrong and to say, oh yeah, that's a dumb question. That's totally already answered or whatever. I think that it all starts with the questions and how you interpret a situation and how you can gather more information about it. Because at the end of the day, like a nebulous, foggy situation is only going to get clearer if you gather more information. And the question is the mechanism in which how you would do that.
Macy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really like talking to you. But before we go, how can people reach out to you? And also, do you do any mentoring?
Yeah, definitely. I do mentoring out of office hours. It's a organization that matches mentors with newcomers. It's honestly like one person, and he designs and develops the application. Like he matches all the newcomers and with the mentors, and it's all free. And they give preference to folks that are in underserved communities. So I've talked to so many people through that organization. And I first started it just to kind of get over my own imposter syndrome and to kind of build that mentoring muscle and things like that. So I love, talking to folks that are new to design or switching careers or getting out of school and things like that. So yeah, always open to mentoring. I should post my calendar on my website. Yeah, you can connect with me on my website, I guess. I'm very bad at social media. I think I opened up my Twitter recently, so you can tweet me, but my website is whoismacy.com. So feel free to email me through there or connect with me on LinkedIn, also through there. And my Twitter is at 37th, the word spelled out.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're interested in any of the resources we mentioned, all the links are on the episode page of our website, theindustryofux.com. Thanks to Macy for coming on the show. Thanks to Youssef Hemimi for the audio engineering work. And a big thank you to Demi He for the post-production work. If you have any feedback about the episode or the show, you can tweet at IndustryUX or leave a comment on theindustryofux.com or our subreddit, The Industry of UX. If you really want to help or say thank you from the bottom of your heart, please leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us climb the charts and bring our show to a bigger audience. Last but not least, thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week.